Hello class, my name is Dr. Camarada. I'll be your instructor for this quarter's version of EPM 4003, Environmental Finance and Economics. In the following presentation, I'm going to give you some frames for thinking about the material you'll be covering in the class, as well as some tips for success. This is the overview of the class. I'm going to make these slides available as a PDF you can print out, take notes if you like, or just refer to as we move through the class. So this will be another resource for you. I'm going to cover 5 topics. First of all, I'll describe what is economics to give you an idea of what the field is about. Talk a little bit about environmental economics, the application of economics to environmental issues. Third topic will be what is finance. For many of you, this is probably your first finance class, so you'll want to pay attention. And then what is environmental finance? Again, the topic of finance as applied to environmental issues. And finally, some tips for online class success. Economics as an area of study, both as a profession and as a university topic, can be defined as the study of scarcity, how people use resources, or decision making. It should actually be "and," because it's really about how people use scarce resources to make decisions about what they want to achieve. A second definition is that economics is the study of human behavior as a relationship between given ends and scarce means, which have alternative uses. Again, it's about making decisions about scarce resources so that we can achieve certain purposes in the world. Economics is also the branch of knowledge concerned with the production, consumption, and transfer of wealth. This is very important because economics sometimes can be too short-sighted in viewing wealth as merely monetarily based wealth. But we'll see with environmental economics, we expand our definition of wealth to include natural resources and ecosystem services. A central tenet of economics is that people want certain things and they're going to change their behavior to get those things. So they're going to respond to incentives. The incentives is a very important part of economics, the topics. Incentives generally come in the form of reduced costs or increased revenues, or reduced costs or increased benefits. This is why cost-benefit analysis is so important. We'll cover that in the finance area. Economics, when we look at a micro level, or we focus down and narrow our scope, is called microeconomics. It's the study of choices by individuals. This is also the topic of managerial economics, which is the study of economic decision making in organizations by managers. When we broaden the scope of our study, we look at governments, industry, central banking, and the boom and bust of the business cycle. We call this macroeconomics. So there's different areas of study depending on what we are focused on and what the scope of our review is. When we look at environmental economics, we see that it's actually a branch of applied economics. And so this is a pretty good definition. It's the application of the principles of economics to the study of how environmental and natural resources are developed and managed. The area that we're focusing on is the relationship between the human economy and the natural environment. One of the big shortcomings of traditional economics is that it focused on the human economy and just looked at the natural environment as a given. What environmental economics does is expand that out to realize that the natural environment, and there's even something called the natural economy based on ecosystem services, is a very important component of economics. And so this is actually the macro view that we just talked about. We expand out our view of the human economy to include non-human actors and the world's ecosystems as a whole. The Environmental economics involves understanding a couple of things. First of all, it's about how natural resources are extracted and used in the human economy and how the waste products are returned to the natural environment. This is the basis of what we call the ecological footprint, which you may have encountered in some of your other classes. Environmental economics also involves studying how economic incentives hurt or help the environment and how they can be used to create sustainable policies and environmental solutions. And so incentives is a key part of environmental economics. We look at multiple forms of incentives, both economic and non-economic, and the key here is to how these incentives are valued by different stakeholders within both the human economy and the natural environment. Finance is a related topic. Finance is about the management, creation, and study of money, banking, credit, investments, assets, and liabilities. And the topics that are covered in finance include cash flow, asset and risk management, capital markets, portfolio theory, international finance, and forecasting and budgeting. So finance really is a drilling down and in the area of economics. It's highly related, but it's really more tool-oriented and decision-oriented. It's essentially a branch of applied accounting, but the accounting principles are not emphasized as much as the separate principles of finance, which you're going to learn about in the class. And I'm sure for many of you, this is your first finance class, so just hang on to your hat, and you'll be okay. The key here is to understand that finance is about decision making. That's one of the main differences between finance and accounting. Accounting is heavily involved with record keeping, whereas finance is about making sense of the data, making sense of information, converting it to meaningful trends, meaningful items using specific tools. Finance is focused on the ways in which individuals, businesses, and organizations, how they raise, allocate, and use monetary resources over time. So there's a couple of aspects here. It's about raising monetary resources, it's about allocating them, and it's about using them. And so there are three separate areas of endeavor that finance looks at within any organization. And you can even look at this on an individual basis, personal finance. It's about generating revenues. It's about how you allocate those, what the percentage of revenues go to what activities, and how they're used. Are they used efficiently? Finance involves the topics of money and other assets, and the management of those assets, as well as profiling and managing project risks. Again, this is about decision making. It's about making decisions about money and making decisions about assets, how we're going to manage those. And it's about making decisions about risks, how much risks exist, what are they, what are the types, and how are we going to allocate money and other assets so that we can mitigate and avoid incurring the consequences of those risks. Environmental finance, again, is also focused on decision making, but it's a different application of the financial tools. It's an application of these tools to environmental issues. Now, the tools that we're going to be learning about in the class include cost-benefit analysis, the time value of money, net present value, the internal rate of return. We're going to look at discounted cash flow valuation and capital investments, and break-even analysis. Now look at these as tools that you're going to learn how to use for the first time. As I said before, for many of you, this is probably the first time you have taken a finance class. And that's okay. Just realize that many of these tools are not intuitive. So the key here is to practice using them and to do some of the self-assessment exercises, the evaluations, use your spreadsheets, use your calculators, keep practicing. The more you learn how to use these tools, the better you'll get at them. And so use the class resources to hone your skills. Environmental finance is the application of the tools that we're going to learn how to use to the following topics. These are some of the current topics in environmental finance. Funding conservation initiatives, things like land use policy. The Nature Conservancy uses this heavily, the tools we just mentioned. It's about improving the impact of businesses on the environment without sacrificing profitability. It's about looking at the multiple costing of outputs and inputs for various stakeholders and looking at the time value of money related to environmental impacts. It's about improving the quality of life for a community. Communities can use these tools also. It doesn't have to be an organization, doesn't have to be a business. Individuals can use these tools. A community can use them, a city, a state, a country. And until recently, these tools were available through the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm not so sure that they're going to be available much longer. Other government agencies around the world use these tools. These tools can also be applied to global investment opportunities across different business sectors. In other words, if we invest in water utilities, say in a developing country, are we going to be able to do so in a profitable way that minimizes risks and maximizes positive environmental impacts? And perhaps one of the most significant areas of environmental finance is that these tools support the shift from environmental regulation control to market-driven economies, because what they do is allow costs to become visible to managers. These environmental costs that previously were invisible, all of a sudden now are being costed and used in decision-making across the organization. This is very significant. There are a couple of current applications that are going on right now, and these are the topics being covered in conferences around the world on environmental finance. Green bonds, stranded assets, especially for oil companies as we transition out of the age of oil into the age of renewables. And again, as the transition moves forward, the assessment of renewable energy technologies and renewable energy projects around the world, we're going to use the tools of environmental finance to assess those for profitability and risk. We can determine whether or not we're going to have debt or equity project financing. These are two basic forms of how we get projects launched in the world. Carbon trading, as in California, is it efficient? Is it effective? Are we achieving our overall policy goals? Again, as I mentioned, water utilities and infrastructure, how do we evaluate those? And finally, from a policymaker standpoint, the tools of environmental finance can be used to evaluate the policies and determine how well we are achieving our economic and financial goals with any particular policy implementation. So that covers the topics for the class. You can launch into these and get started by reading through the syllabus and reading through the text. However, I want to cover something that's very important, and this is what I've learned from teaching classes for many, many years, especially classes for topics that aren't necessarily intuitive, that can be difficult and involve teams. So the first tip for success is to show up. That means to log into the class as often as possible, preferably a minimum of 3 times a week. And for your teams, be in constant communication, set a schedule, talk to your team members, work together. Use the tools available to you. You can use Skype, you can use the discussion threads in the class website, you can use WebEx if you have an account on WebEx, you can get a free account. Make sure that you show up, that you are present in the virtual world. Make frequent posts, ask questions, make sure you share your telephone number and other contact information. So this can be especially challenging as people are geographically distributed. However, in the virtual world, there really is no excuse for not showing up. I mean, if you have a smartphone, you can get Skype and you can stay in touch with your team and with the class with a minimum of effort. The second tip for success is to be here. As I said before, many of these topics are non-intuitive. These are difficult tools to use at first, and you'll get better at using them once you have some practice. So being here means to focus on the class content. When you're studying, I recommend you turn off your cell phone, find a quiet area, or if you like to study in a noisy environment, some people like to go to the coffee shop. Wherever it is that you are studying and participating in the class, be there. Focus on the class. Don't do multitasking. It doesn't work. It has actually been proven by neuroscientists that what you're doing is switching rapidly from task to task. And what happens is as you increase the number of switches, your ability to concentrate on any one topic decreases. So focus down. Really get narrow with the topic. Focus on your studies. Eliminate distractions and be there in the class. Really center your attention on what's going on. The third tip is nobody gets to be wrong, and this is essentially online etiquette. We're not judging other people. If we already knew all this material, we would have graduated already. However, we're all in the class together. I'll act as your guide and your mentor, and we're all learning together. So the fact that other people don't know something, or perhaps if they make what is seemingly a silly mistake, we don't judge them for that. Everybody's learning, and so we expect that mistakes are going to be made. In fact, that leads us into the fourth tip. Everybody gets to be right. This is a time for you to practice. It's about learning how to use the tools. I mean, you can look at these tools as hammers or saws or anything like that that a carpenter would use to build a house. And what you're doing is learning to build a portfolio of tools that you can take out into your career, into the world, and apply them. So everybody gets to be right. We all have a chance to practice. So follow these tips for success. Show up, log in often, communicate a lot, share your information, be here, focus on the material, eliminate distractions, turn off your cell phone when you're reading and studying, really get into it. This is a different way of thinking, and it takes some time to really understand what we're all about in this class. Nobody gets to be wrong. Be respectful of your fellow students, be respectful of the material, and hopefully of the instructor. And everybody gets to be right. Use the time to practice. Now is your time. You signed up for this class. This is the time you get to learn how to use these tools so that you can make a positive difference in the world. So that's it. That's the overview presentation. I hope you have a good idea of what's required in terms of understanding the topics of economics and environmental economics, as well as finance and environmental finance. Please follow the tips for success. They're very important. I've arrived at those after many years of teaching, and I've found those to be applicable to all students, whether you're online or on ground. And students who follow those tips are always successful, always, 100% of the time. So the next steps are to download the syllabus, and if you have any questions, you can always get in touch with me. Send me an email, leave me a voicemail, post a question in the Q&A threads on the class website. So we'll see you online.